The night they threw me out, the rain hadn't started yet. That came later. I remember thinking the sky looked tired, like it had been holding something in all day. Heavy clouds pressing down on the rooftops of Maple Street, the air thick, still, waiting. I was waiting too, standing in the back office of Briarwood Tavern with my hands behind my back, the way Frank Delaney liked his employees to stand when he was about to speak. Quiet, respectful, small. I'd worked there 8 months. 8 months of 14-hour shifts, 8 months of burns on my forearms from the deep fryer, 8 months of mopping the floor at 2 in the morning while Frank counted cash in this very office with the door closed. And today was payday. 3 months of back wages, 3 months of him saying, "Next week, kid, next week," 3 months of me believing him because I needed to believe him, because the money in that envelope on his desk was going to change everything. It was going to pay for a real apartment. Not the room I rented above the laundromat where the floor shook when the dryers ran. A real apartment. With a door that locked, with a window. It was going to pay for a headstone. My mother's grave still had a temporary marker on it. 3 years. 3 years of me walking past Section C in Greenlawn Cemetery and seeing that cheap aluminum plate with her name printed on a sticker. Rebecca Whitlock, 1968 to 2023. She deserved better than a sticker. So I waited. Frank sat behind his desk, gold pinky ring catching the light from the lamp. Heavy-set man, mid-50s, soft hands that had never washed a dish in his life. He was counting money, a thick stack, hundreds. I tried not to look at it. "Caleb," he said. He didn't look up. "Yes, sir." I've been thinking I should have run right then. When a man like Frank Delaney says, "I've been thinking," you run. But I was 20 years old, and I was hungry, and I was tired, and I still believed in the world a little bit. I still believed that if you worked hard, people paid you. That was the deal. That was the rule. So I just said, "Yes, sir." He finally looked up, slid a piece of paper across the desk. "You're going to want to read this." I picked it up. My hands were already shaking before I knew why. It was a bill from me to him. Damaged equipment walk-in freezer compressor, $2,800. Damaged equipment hood fan motor, $1,200. Total liability, $4,000. I read it twice. I read it 3 times. "Frank," I said, "I never broke any of this stuff. I don't even touch the compressor. That's Miguel's job." Frank smiled. That smile is something I'll remember when I'm an old man on my deathbed. I'll remember the gold tooth on the left side. I'll remember the way his eyes didn't move when his mouth did. I'll remember the smell of the cigar in the ashtray and the cheap cologne and the way the lamp made his bald head shine like a wet stone. "Caleb," he said, "it's your word against mine. But, and here's the thing, kid, you owe me $300. After we deduct your back wages. $300. The room tilted. But because I'm a generous man, because I have a heart, I'm going to forgive that debt." He picked up the envelope, my envelope, 3 months of work. He put it inside his desk drawer. He locked the drawer. We're square. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember my chair scraping back. I just remember being on my feet and my hands being fists and saying something I don't even remember saying. That's when the door opened. 2 men walked in. I knew them. Tony from the kitchen, Big Russ from the bar, Frank's guys, the ones who handled situations. "Caleb's leaving," Frank said. "Help him with his things." Tony grabbed my elbow. Russ grabbed my backpack off the floor. I'd brought my whole life to work that day because I was supposed to walk out with money, because I was supposed to find an apartment that night. Russ opened the backpack, started going through it, right there, in front of me. "He's looking for tips," Frank said. "Server's been complaining you've been pocketing tips, Caleb." I hadn't pocketed anything. But Russ found my wallet, pulled out 3 crumpled tens, $30, the tips I'd earned that week and hidden in the wallet because I didn't trust the lockers. He set the 30 on Frank's desk. "That's evidence," Frank said. "We'll hold on to that." And then Russ found the photograph. It was in the front pocket, wrapped in a paper napkin. because I carried it with me everywhere, because it was the only picture I had of my mother. Because the day she died, they cleaned out our apartment so fast, I only saved three things: her wedding ring, her Bible. And this picture, she was 22 in it, standing on a beach in Maine, smiling like she meant it, wind in her hair. Russ unwrapped it, held it up. "What's this, kid? Your girlfriend?" "That's my mother," I said. "Give it back." He looked at Frank. Frank looked at me, and Frank Delaney, owner of Briarwood Tavern, 54 years old, gold pinky ring, soft hands, took that photograph from Russ's fingers, held it up where I could see it, and tore it in half. Slowly, watching my face the whole time, I lunged. I made it maybe one step before Tony slammed me against the wall and the photograph fluttered to the floor in two pieces, and Frank started laughing, and I was screaming something, but I couldn't hear myself because there was a sound in my head like a freight train, and they dragged me out the back door, threw the backpack after me. The alley smelled like grease and garbage. I landed on my knees on the wet asphalt. The door slammed shut behind me. I heard the deadbolt turn. I crawled back to the door and pounded on it. "My picture! Give me back my picture!" Nothing. I pounded until my hands hurt, until my voice cracked, until I sat down with my back against that cold steel door, and I cried like a child. Because I was a child. Because I had always been a child, even though my driver's license said I was 20. And now I had nothing. Nothing except $30 hidden in my left sock. I'd put it there that morning. I don't even know why. Maybe because deep down I knew. Maybe because some part of me has always known what men like Frank Delaney are capable of. I sat in that alley for a long time, long enough for the streetlight to flicker on, long enough for the rain to finally come. It came soft at first, then harder. I reached into the alley, searched the wet ground until my fingers found it, half a photograph. The bottom half, my mother's hands, the hem of her summer dress, the sand by her feet. The top half, her face had blown away. I folded what was left and put it in my chest pocket. Then I picked up my backpack and I walked. I didn't know where I was going, but I walked. The Greyhound station was 12 blocks away. I knew it because I'd taken a bus once, 3 years ago, to go identify my mother's body. They'd called from the hospital, pneumonia. They said it like it was nothing. Like people don't die of pneumonia anymore. But poor people do. Uninsured people do. People who can't afford to miss a day of work do. She'd waited too long to see a doctor. She'd done it for me. So I'd ridden a Greyhound bus to the hospital, and then a Greyhound bus back, and the seat had felt very large with no one in it next to me. That same bus station was open 24 hours. I walked there in the rain. By the time I arrived, my clothes were soaked through. My shoes squelched. I was shivering so hard my teeth hurt. The station had a row of plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a vending machine that only sold off-brand chips, a bathroom with a hand dryer that didn't work, fluorescent lights that hummed. I picked a chair in the corner, sat down, took out the $30 from my sock, counted it, 3 tens, wet, curled at the edges. I tried to think of a plan. I couldn't. My brain wouldn't make a plan. My brain just kept showing me Frank's face. Frank tearing the photograph. The slow way he did it, the way he watched me. I closed my eyes. I prayed. I hadn't prayed since my mother's funeral. But I prayed in that bus station. I said, "God, if you're there, if you ever loved her, help me. Because I can't do this alone. I can't." And then I fell asleep. I woke up to a hand on my shoulder. I jerked awake, hands up, ready to fight. It was an old woman, cleaning lady, pushing a mop bucket. She held up both hands like she was the one apologizing. "Sorry, honey," she said. "You can't sleep here. Manager comes in at 6. He'll call the police." I checked the clock above the ticket counter. 5:47 a.m. I'd slept maybe 3 hours. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry. I'm leaving." She looked at me, really looked, the way only old women look, like they've already seen the worst of what life can do and they're not surprised by any of it anymore. "You eaten?" she asked. "I'm fine." She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a granola bar, pressed it into my hand. There's a Methodist church on Hawthorne Avenue, she said. 3 blocks east. They open at 7. They serve breakfast on Tuesdays. It was Tuesday. Thank you, I said. Thank you, ma'am. She nodded, went back to her mopping. I never saw her again, but I think about her sometimes. I think about how a granola bar in a stranger's hand can keep you alive when nothing else can. The Methodist church on Hawthorne Avenue was small. White wooden siding, a modest steeple, a sign out front that read, "All are welcome," in letters that had been freshly painted. I sat across the street on a bus bench until 7 o'clock. I didn't want to go in. I don't know why. Pride, maybe. Shame, maybe. Or maybe the simple fact that I hadn't been in a church since the day they buried my mother, and walking into one alone felt like walking into a memory I wasn't ready to revisit. But the granola bar was gone, and I was so hungry I felt sick. So at 7 o'clock I crossed the street, climbed the 3 steps, and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The smell hit me first. Coffee, bacon, pancakes, cinnamon, the smell of someone's grandmother's kitchen on a Sunday morning. There were maybe 10 people inside, mostly elderly, sitting at folding tables in the fellowship hall, eating from paper plates, talking quietly. And there was a man standing by the coffee urn, 65 or so. Silver hair, neatly combed, wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a gray cardigan over a plaid shirt. The kind of man who looked like he'd been a high school history teacher in another life. He saw me come in. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at me. The way the cleaning lady had looked at me. Then he poured a cup of coffee, walked over, held it out. "Cream and sugar? Please. Sit down, son. I'll bring you a plate." I sat at the end of an empty table. I didn't know why I was crying. I hadn't cried in the alley. I hadn't cried in the bus station. But sitting in that warm room with a paper cup of coffee in my hands and the smell of bacon in the air, I cried into my sleeve like I was 4 years old. The man brought me a plate, eggs, pancakes, 3 strips of bacon, a biscuit. He sat down across from me. He didn't ask any questions. He just ate his own breakfast and let me eat mine. When I finally pushed my plate away, he poured me a second cup of coffee and said, "I'm Nathaniel Pierce. I'm the pastor here." "Caleb," I said. "Caleb Whitlock." He nodded. "That's a good name." We sat in silence for a while. Then he said something strange. He said, "You walked here from somewhere, from the bus station. And before that, from work. I lost my job last night. I'm sorry to hear that." He stirred his coffee with a little plastic stick. "Do you have somewhere to go, Caleb?" I shook my head. I couldn't speak. Reverend Pierce nodded slowly, like a man processing information he had already half expected. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his cardigan and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is going to sound peculiar," he said. He unfolded the paper, set it on the table between us. It was a flyer, printed in plain black ink on white copy paper. "Storage unit auction today. 2 p.m., cash only, Riverside Storage, 7,400 Fallbrook Road." I looked up at him. "I don't have any money," I said. "How much do you have?" $30. He nodded again. Same slow nod. "That might be enough." "Enough for what?" He didn't answer right away. He picked up his coffee, took a long sip, set it down, and then he said something I have never forgotten. He said, "There was a woman in this congregation. Her name was Eleanor Brooks. She came to my services for the last 6 years of her life. She died about a month ago. She was 88 years old, and she was one of the loneliest people I have ever met." I didn't know what to say to that. She had a storage unit, number 114. They're auctioning it off today because no one came forward as next of kin. Before she died, Eleanor told the storage company something unusual. She asked them to start the bidding very low. She said, he paused. He looked at me over his glasses. She said, "Let it go to whoever needs it most." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I don't know why. There was no reason for it. It was just a coincidence. A nice old lady had said a nice thing before she died. But I felt it. I felt something turn over inside me. Reverend Pierce slid the flyer across the table. I'm not telling you to go, Caleb. I'm just telling you the auction is today. And sometimes the Lord opens doors in places we'd never think to look. I picked up the flyer. It was still warm from his pocket. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He smiled, a small, tired smile. Because Eleanor was a friend of mine, he said. And because I think she would have liked you. Riverside Storage was a 20-minute walk from the church. Reverend Pierce gave me a bag with a sandwich and an apple and a bottle of water. He gave me directions on a napkin. He told me he would pray for me. I didn't believe in prayer, but I thanked him anyway. The rain had stopped. The sun was trying to come out through the clouds, weak and pale. The streets were waking up. Trucks delivering bread. A woman walking a small dog. A boy on a bicycle. I walked the whole way. By the time I got to Fallbrook Road, my socks were dry, my stomach was full, and I had $30 folded in my front pocket. Riverside Storage was a long, low building. Orange metal doors. A gravel parking lot. There were maybe 20 people gathered outside, a few couples, some older men with notebooks, a young woman with a clipboard. A man with a megaphone was standing on a wooden crate. Folks, we'll start in 5 minutes, cash only, no checks, no cards. Bidding starts at $20 unless otherwise noted. I stood at the back of the crowd. I felt out of place. Every person there looked like they belonged to a different world than me. They had pickup trucks and cargo vans and dollies. They had cash and money clips. They had been doing this for years. I was a kid in wet sneakers with $30 and a sandwich. The auction started. The first unit was full of furniture, sold for $200. The second unit was tools, sold for $350. The third was junk, cardboard boxes, old clothes, sold for $40. I watched, I listened. I was looking for unit 114. It came up sixth. The auctioneer rolled up the orange metal door. The unit was small, maybe 10 by 10, dusty. Sunlight cut across the air in long, pale bars. I could see the shapes of boxes, a broken chair, a standing lamp with no shade, a pile of what looked like old curtains. It looked like nothing. The auctioneer looked at his clipboard. Here's a special one, folks. Family of the renter, Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, left specific instructions. Bidding starts low. $20. Who'll give me 20? Nobody moved. 15? A man in the front rolled his eyes, lit a cigarette. $10. A few people laughed. Folks, come on. $10. Anybody. My hand went up before I thought about it. I didn't decide to raise it. It just happened. The auctioneer pointed at me. 10 from the young man in the back. Someone in the crowd snorted. A guy next to me, older, in a Yankees cap, turned and looked me up and down. You sure about that, kid? I nodded. I wasn't sure about anything. 10 going once, 10 going twice. The auctioneer waited, sold to the kid in the back. $10. There was laughter. There were a few claps. The man in the Yankees cap shook his head and walked away. I walked up to the auctioneer, handed him a wet $10 bill. He gave me a slip of paper and a small brass key. He looked at me for a long moment. He was a heavy-set man with a gray mustache. His eyes were kind in a way that surprised me. He leaned in. He said quietly, I knew Mrs. Brooks a little. She used to come down here every couple of months, just to sit by the unit. Never opened it, just sat in a folding chair outside. Drank her tea, watched the cars go by. I didn't know what to say to that. She told me something once, She said, Donald, when I'm gone, you make sure this auction is opened up cheap, real cheap, cheap enough that whoever needs it most can take it home. He pressed the key into my palm. I don't know what's in there, son, but I think she'd be happy it went to you. Inside, the unit smelled like dust and old paper and faintly of lavender. The lavender threw me. It was so unexpected. I stood in the doorway and let my eyes adjust. The light coming in over my shoulder lit up a column of dust in the air, particles floating like tiny stars. There was a path through the middle of the unit, like Eleanor had walked through it many times. I stepped inside. To my right, a stack of cardboard boxes labeled in shaky handwriting, books, sewing, kitchen, photos. To my left, a wooden chair with a broken leg, a standing lamp, a toolbox, an old metal trunk. In the back, a small dresser, a folded quilt, a crate of what looked like glass bottles. I started with the boxes. I opened the one labeled kitchen first. Teacups, mismatched, wrapped carefully in newsprint, a teapot with a chipped spout. I opened the box labeled sewing. Spools of thread, a pin cushion shaped like a tomato, a pair of small silver scissors. I opened books, mostly hardcover, some Bibles, a photo album that was empty. That empty photo album stopped me for a second. Empty pages, plastic sleeves, not a single picture, like she'd been waiting to fill it. I set the album aside, gently. I opened a box labeled photos. There were maybe 50 photographs inside, scattered loose, no order, mostly black and white, a few in faded color. I sifted through them. Old portraits, a wedding photo from what looked like the 1950s, a picture of two little girls holding hands in front of a Christmas tree. And then I stopped because I'd seen a photograph that didn't belong. It was newer than the others. Maybe from the 1960s. Color, but faded. A woman, maybe 30 years old, standing on a beach. A small girl in front of her, maybe 10 years old, holding a seashell up to the camera. The woman was beautiful. Dark hair, a summer dress, a small, wide smile. I turned the photograph over, in careful, slanted handwriting in fountain pen ink that had faded to brown, Maggie and Mama, summer of 1968. I stared at it for a long time. Then I put it in my chest pocket with what was left of the photograph of my mother. I don't know why I did that. I just did. I worked through the unit for 2 hours. Most of what I found wasn't valuable. A flashlight, brand new, still in the package, a box of canning jars, a coffee can full of pennies, a small porcelain figurine of a bird. But near the back of the unit, behind the toolbox, I found something that didn't fit. A black metal lockbox, about the size of a large book, heavy, the kind banks used to sell. There was a small keyhole on the front. I shook it gently. Something inside shifted, a soft, layered sound, like padded objects rubbing together. I set it on top of the toolbox and looked for a key. I searched the toolbox first. Sockets, wrenches, screwdrivers, no key. I searched the boxes, the dresser drawers, the crate of bottles. Nothing. I sat down on the broken chair and looked around the unit. I thought about how lonely it must have been for Eleanor Brooks, sitting in a folding chair outside this door, drinking tea, watching cars. Why didn't she ever come inside? What was she waiting for? And then I noticed something. There was a small piece of masking tape stuck to the underside of the lockbox. I'd missed it because the box was so heavy I'd just set it down. I tilted the box. Taped to the bottom, almost flush against the metal, was a tiny brass key, smaller than a fingernail. My hands began to shake. I peeled the key off carefully. I fitted into the lock. I turned. It clicked. The lid lifted on a soft hinge. Inside, on a bed of dark blue velvet, neatly arranged in 2 rows, were 6 wristwatches, 3 silver, 3 gold. The light coming in over my shoulder caught the polished surfaces and threw small bright spots onto the dusty walls of the storage unit. I didn't know anything about watches. I didn't know what they were worth, or what brand they were, or why someone would lock 6 of them in a box and never open it. But I knew this. I knew that I had walked into that unit $10 poorer than when I walked in with half a photograph in my chest pocket and a stranger's prayer in my ear and a stranger's flyer in my hand. And I knew that something had just changed. I lowered the lid very gently. I locked it. I put the key in my front pocket along with what was left of my money, $20, and the 2 photographs. Then I sat on the broken chair. in Unit 114, in the smell of dust and lavender, and I cried. Not the way I'd cried in the alley. Not the way I'd cried in the church. I cried the way people cry when they've been carrying something so heavy for so long they didn't even know they were carrying it. Until the moment somebody helps them set it down. That night I slept on a cot in Reverend Pierce's office. He didn't ask me what I'd found in the unit. He just handed me a clean shirt and a blanket and told me to get some sleep. I dreamed about my mother. She was standing on a beach. She was holding the hand of a woman I didn't recognize. And both of them were smiling at me, like they'd been waiting. I woke up at 5:42 inches, the morning, same as always. Reverend Pierce was already in the kitchen. He was making coffee in a percolator that looked older than I was. He didn't turn around when I came in. He just said, "There's a watch shop on Birch Street owned by a woman named Margaret Aldridge. She's been there 23 years. She's the most honest person I know in this city. If you take those watches to a pawn shop, they will lie to you. If you take them to Maggie Aldridge, she will tell you the truth, even if the truth is hard." I said, "Thank you." He smiled. It was a small smile, but it changed his whole face. "You're welcome, Caleb. Now eat your toast." Aldridge Timepieces was 4 blocks from the church. I walked there with the lockbox in my backpack and the brass key in my fist. The shop was small, a narrow storefront wedged between a dry cleaner and a coffee shop. A hand-painted wooden sign hung above the door. Faded green paint, gold lettering. Aldridge Timepieces, Est, 2003. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time. I almost walked away, twice. Then I opened the door. A small brass bell rang above my head. The shop smelled like wood polish and machine oil. It was warm. There was a small space heater in the corner that made a soft mechanical clicking sound. The walls were lined with clocks. Pendulum clocks, mantel clocks, cuckoo clocks, wristwatches mounted in shallow display cases. They were all ticking. Hundreds of them, all slightly out of sync. There was a long glass counter at the back. Behind it, an old workbench under a green-shaded lamp. A woman was sitting at the workbench. Her back was to me. She wore a gray cardigan over a navy blouse. Silver hair pulled back into a low bun. A pair of reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She was bent over something small, working with a pair of tweezers. She didn't turn around when the bell rang. She just said, "I'll be with you in a moment. Please don't touch the displays." Her voice was warm, the kind of voice that had been answering that bell for 23 years. After a minute or so, she set down her tweezers, straightened, and turned around. She was 68 years old. Her face was lined the way faces get lined when a person has done a lot of work and a lot of worrying for a long time. But her eyes were sharp, clear, the kind of eyes that take you in completely the first time they look at you. She took me in. She saw the borrowed shirt, the cheap sneakers, the black lockbox in my hands. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just said, "How can I help you, young man?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I tried again. "I have some watches," I said. "I bought them at an auction. I was told you would tell me the truth." She looked at the lockbox. She looked back at my face. "Who told you that?" "Reverend Nathaniel Pierce, from the Methodist Church." Her expression changed. Not much. Just a small softening at the corners of her eyes. "Nathaniel sent you." "Yes, ma'am." She nodded slowly. She gestured at the counter. "Put it down here. Let me see." I set the lockbox on the glass counter. I pulled the brass key out of my pocket. My fingers were so unsteady I had to try twice to get it into the lock. I lifted the lid. I turned the box around so she could see. She bent forward. The brass bell over the door was still settling from when I came in. I remember thinking that even after how strange it was that the bell was still ringing in some small way when everything changed. She bent forward over the lockbox, and her right hand flew up to her chest like she'd been struck. She made a sound, not a word, just a sound. It was a sound I'd heard once before when my mother got the diagnosis at the clinic and they wouldn't let me into the room. It was the sound you make when something hits you so hard your body can't decide whether to laugh or cry or fall down. She steadied herself against the counter. Her glasses slid down her nose. Where, she said very slowly, did you get these? At a storage auction. Yesterday. Riverside Storage. Unit 114. She lifted one of the watches. A silver one. She turned it over in her hand. There was a tiny engraving on the back. I watched her read it. Her face crumpled. She put the watch down on the velvet, carefully. The way you set down something that might break the rest of the world if you dropped it. She walked around the counter. She stopped in front of me. She was shorter than me by half a head. She looked up. Her eyes were full. "What is your name?" she said. "Caleb. Caleb Whitlock." "Caleb." She said it like she was tasting the word. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she said, "My mother. These watches belong to my mother." Her name was Eleanor Brooks. I haven't seen these watches since 1986. I haven't seen my mother since 1986. I have been looking for her for 20 years. The shop seemed to tilt. I caught the edge of the counter. She looked up at me, steady, holding herself together with both hands. "And now you walk in here," she said, carrying a piece of my whole life, like it was nothing, like you just stopped in for a watch battery. She let out a small laugh, a laugh and a cry at the same time. She put one hand on my arm, just for a second. Then she walked to the front door of her shop. She turned the open sign to closed. She locked the deadbolt, and she said, "Come with me, we need to sit down." The back room of Aldrich Timepieces was warm and small and full of old furniture. A leather armchair, a flowered sofa with a knitted throw across the back, a wooden coffee table covered in stacks of magazines, a little kitchenette with a kettle that whistled before she even sat down. She made tea, 2 cups, strong English breakfast. She put 2 sugars in mine without asking. She put the lockbox on the coffee table between us. She sat across from me in the leather chair. She looked at me for a long time before she spoke. "I owe you a story," she said, "and I think you might owe me one too, but mine is older. Let me go first." I nodded. I held the tea with both hands to keep them still. My mother's name was Eleanor Brooks. She was born in 1938. She was the daughter of a watchmaker. He had a shop just like this one, smaller, in Pennsylvania. She grew up surrounded by ticking. She smiled a little. She married my father in 1957, a man named William Brooks. He was a kind man, quiet. He sold insurance. He played the piano badly. They had me in 1958. They tried to have more children. None of the others came. She took a long breath. I grew up in a house full of clocks. I learned the trade. I knew I would take over the family shop someday. That was the plan. That was always the plan. She looked down at her teacup. Then I met a man. I didn't say anything. She didn't look up. He was 25. I was 24. He had a motorcycle and a mouthful of opinions, and he told me he was going to be a famous architect. My father took one look at him and said, "Margaret, that boy's going to break you." She turned her teacup in her hands. My father was right, but I didn't know that at the time. I only knew I was in love. And my mother stood in our kitchen in the summer of 1983 and said to me, "Maggie, if you marry that man, don't come back to this house." She paused, so I married him, and I didn't come back. I felt my chest tighten. It was the last thing she said to me, Maggie said, and the last thing I said to her was, "I will never need you again as long as I live." She set the teacup down. She wiped her eyes with the cuff of her cardigan. We had a daughter a year later. In 1984, I named her Diane. My mother never met her. My father never met her either, because he died of a heart attack in 1996, and by the time I found out, it was 3 days after the funeral. She looked up. I went back to Pennsylvania after that. The shop was gone. The house was sold. My mother had moved away. No forwarding address. I hired a private investigator. He cost me $3,000 I didn't have. He found nothing. I was crying. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit the back of my hand. My husband left me in 1999, she said. He went to California, took our money, took the car, even the dog, left me with our daughter. Diane was 15. I closed my eyes. Diane was beautiful. She was bright. She had her grandmother's hands. She loved music. She wanted to be a nurse. She was going to do everything I never did. She was going to make me proud. She stopped. She couldn't go on for a moment. She picked up her teacup again, set it back down, then folded her hands in her lap. She got sick when she was 21, a heart condition, the same thing that killed my father. We didn't have good insurance. We tried everything. She looked at me. She died on a Tuesday morning, the 14th of November, 2006. She was 22. The room got very quiet. I could hear all the clocks in the front of the shop, ticking, counting time that had already happened, counting time that hadn't happened yet. I opened this shop in 2003, she said. Diane was 19. She used to do her homework at this very table. I opened it because I thought maybe if I made the shop look like my father's shop, maybe one day my mother would walk past the window. Maybe one day she would see it. Maybe one day she would come in. She looked at the bell over the door. For 20 years, she said, every time that bell has rung, my heart has stopped. Every time. Because every time I have thought, maybe this is her. She turned back to me. And today the bell rang. And it wasn't her. It was you, with her watches in a box. She reached across the table. She took my hand. Caleb, she said, I think you and I need to figure out who you are. I told her my story. I told her about Frank Delaney and the back wages and the torn photograph in the rain. I told her about the cleaning lady and the granola bar. I told her about Reverend Pierce and the flyer. I told her about $10 and Unit 114 and the lockbox under the toolbox. I told her about my mother, Rebecca Whitlock, born 1968, died of pneumonia in 2023, single mother, worked at a hospital cafeteria, loved gardenias, made the best macaroni and cheese in 3 counties, never finished high school, got her GED at 30, saved for years to put me through community college. Maggie listened to every word. She didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp. She just listened. When I was done, she sat back in her chair. Caleb, she said, tell me about your mother, about her family. Tell me what she told you about her own people. I had to think. She didn't talk about it much, I said. She told me she was adopted. She told me she was raised by a woman named Hannah Whitlock in Ohio. Hannah died when my mother was 25. I never met her. My mother never knew anything about her birth family. She tried to look once, when I was little. She said the records were sealed. Maggie's hand was over her mouth. I kept going. She said it didn't matter who she came from. She said I was her people. She said our family started with us. I wiped my eyes. That's what she said. Maggie made a small sound. She got up. She crossed the room. She came back with the photograph from the lockbox, the one of Eleanor and the little girl on the beach. She turned it over in her hands. This is me, she said. This is me and my mother. Summer of 1968, Cape May, New Jersey. She took me to the beach for my 10th birthday. She held the photograph out to me. Look at her face, Caleb. I looked. Eleanor Brooks, 30 years old in this picture. Dark hair, a summer dress, a small, wide smile. I reached into my chest pocket. I pulled out what was left of the photograph of my mother. The bottom half. Her hands, her dress, the sand. I set it next to the photograph of Eleanor. The hands, the dress, the angle of the shoulders. The same. Maggie covered her face with both hands. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh my God. She held herself together. Barely, she took a long breath. She said, Caleb, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it carefully. I nodded. My daughter Diane, she said, when she got sick, there were complications. She and her boyfriend had been together for 2 years. He was a good boy. His name was Tyler Morgan. He died in a car accident when Diane was 20, 6 months before she got sick. I felt a strange weight in my stomach. Diane was pregnant when Tyler died, Maggie said. She didn't tell me until she was almost 5 months along. She was scared. She didn't know what to do. I told her we would figure it out together. She stopped. She closed her eyes. Then she got the diagnosis. The doctor said the pregnancy might kill her if she carried it to term. The heart couldn't handle it. They told her to terminate. She wouldn't. She said, "Mama, this baby is the last thing I have of Tyler. I would rather die than not give him a chance." Maggie's voice broke. They delivered him early. A little boy, healthy, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, the 3rd of November, 2006. 11 days before she died, I couldn't breathe. She made me promise something. Before she went into the delivery room, she said, "Mama, if I don't make it, I don't want you to raise him alone. You'll be heartbroken. You'll be old. He deserves a young mother who will love him and tell him about me when he can understand. There's a woman at the hospital, a nurse. She lost her husband 2 years ago. She has no children. She would be perfect. Please, promise me." Maggie was crying. I was crying. "I promised," she said, "and I kept my promise because I loved her, because she asked me to, because she was right. I was heartbroken. I would have ruined him." She looked up at me. The woman my daughter chose, the nurse, her name was, she couldn't say it. I said it for her, Rebecca Whitlock. I don't remember everything that happened next. I remember Maggie crossing the room. I remember her arms going around me. I remember the smell of lavender soap and old wool and English breakfast tea. I remember the way she held the back of my head, the way mothers hold the heads of their babies, like she was trying to remember the shape of it with her hands. I remember her saying over and over, I knew, I always knew you were out there. I always knew." When we finally separated, we were both wrecked. She pulled herself together first. She always would. I would come to learn. Maggie was the strongest person I have ever known, not because she didn't cry, because she could cry and then keep going. "There's something I need to show you," she said. She went to a small writing desk in the corner. She unlocked a drawer. She took out a worn leather folder. She brought it back to the table. She opened it. Inside, in plastic sleeves, were documents, old letters, birth certificates, court orders, a small photograph of a baby in a hospital cap. She slid one document across the table. It was a copy. The original was probably sealed, but she'd had a copy. Certificate of adoption, State of Ohio, the 24th of November, 2006. Birth name, Caleb Tyler Aldridge. Adopted name, Caleb Whitlock. Birth mother, Diane Marie Aldridge. Adoptive mother, Rebecca Ann Whitlock. I looked at the date, the 24th of November, 2006, 10 days after my mother had died. Maggie put her hand on the paper. "I have looked at this document," she said, "every single morning for 20 years. She looked at me. "I knew your name. I knew your face when you were 2 days old. I just never knew where to find you." Maggie's shop closed at 5. She didn't open it again. She stood up from the table around 4 o'clock. She went to the front of the shop. She turned the closed sign around and locked it that way. She came back. She looked at me. She looked at the lockbox. She looked at the borrowed shirt I was wearing. She said, "When was the last time you slept in a real bed?" I tried to remember. I couldn't. She said, "There's a guest room upstairs. It was Diane's old bedroom. I haven't touched it in 20 years. The sheets are clean. I change them once a month, just in case." She looked away, just in case somebody ever came. I couldn't speak. She picked up my backpack. She said, "Come on, let's get you home." The stairs at the back of the shop led up to a small apartment. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with yellow curtains, a living room with a green sofa and an old television set on a wooden stand. Diane's room was at the end of the hall. Maggie stopped at the door. She put her hand on the knob. She didn't open it. "It looks the same as the day she died," she said. "I haven't changed anything." She looked at me. You don't have to sleep in here, Caleb. There's a sofa, there's another room. I wanted you to see. I said, I'd like to sleep in here, if that's all right with you. Her eyes filled again. She opened the door. The room was full of light. Afternoon light falling through gauzy white curtains, a twin bed with a pale pink quilt, a wooden dresser, a bookshelf with paperbacks and a small ceramic rabbit and a stack of nursing textbooks from 20 years ago. There were posters on the wall, a jazz festival from 2004, a photograph of Maya Angelou, a black and white print of a single piano key. There was a guitar on a stand in the corner. That was Tyler's, Maggie said softly. She kept it after he died. She used to sleep with it next to the bed. I went to the dresser. There were 3 photographs on top. One of Maggie and Diane at what looked like a high school graduation. One of Tyler, smiling, holding a guitar, maybe 20 years old. And one of Diane, by herself, late pregnancy, sitting in a hospital chair, one hand on her belly, smiling at the camera, smiling at me. I picked up that photograph. I held it in both hands. And I sat down on the edge of the bed of the mother I had never known, in the bedroom of the mother who had died so I could live, in the home of the grandmother I had spent my whole life not knowing existed. I held that picture, and I felt my mother, both of my mothers, for the first time, all at once, in the same body. Maggie sat down next to me on the bed. She didn't touch me. She just sat there. I lay down on the bed of the woman who had given her life for mine, and I stared up at the ceiling, and I listened to the clocks ticking in the shop below us, hundreds of them, all telling the time slightly differently, all measuring something they couldn't name. And for the first time in 20 years, I slept somewhere that someone had been saving for me. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon and the sound of 2 voices in the kitchen. Maggie's voice, soft, warm, and another voice, a man's, older, familiar. Reverend Pierce was sitting at the kitchen table. He looked up when I came in. He looked at me. He looked at Maggie standing at the stove. He set his fork down. He said very quietly, "So it really is true." Maggie turned around, spatula in her hand. "You knew?" "I suspected." "For how long?" He looked at her. "Eleanor came to me almost 2 years ago. She was very weak by then. She told me her whole story. About you, about Diane, about a baby she'd been trying to find for 20 years. Maggie sat down hard in the chair across from him. "You knew yesterday when you sent him to me. You knew." "I suspected, Maggie. I couldn't have known for sure. But I knew that a 20-year-old boy with no family had just walked into my fellowship hall on a Tuesday morning. And I knew that Eleanor's unit was being auctioned that afternoon. And I knew that if I was wrong, nothing would happen. And if I was right," he looked at us both. "If I was right, 2 of God's lonely children would find each other." So I gave him the flyer. And I prayed. He reached across the table. He took Maggie's hand. "Eleanor left me something else, Maggie. Before she died, she gave me a letter. She told me that if a boy who fit ever came to me right age, no family, came from Ohio, I should send him to a woman named Ruth Callahan on Mulberry Avenue." Maggie went very still. Ruth, Eleanor's neighbor. The last 12 years of her life, they had tea together every Sunday. Eleanor left something with her, a sealed envelope. Ruth was instructed not to open it, not unless someone came asking. He stood up. "I think it's time we paid Ruth a visit." I had taken 3 more things from Unit 114 before I'd left it the day before. I hadn't shown Maggie yet. 3 of the 6 watches in the lockbox. I'd had a feeling. I told Maggie about it before we left to see Ruth. I showed her the watches I'd set aside. She frowned. She took them to her workbench. She lifted a loop to her eye. She turned over the silver wristwatch first. She looked at the back. She looked at the movement. She set it down. Her face went pale. She picked up the second watch, the gold one. Her hands began to tremble. She lifted the loop again. She moved closer to the lamp. She turned the watch in her fingers. She set it down. She said one word, "No." She picked up the third watch. She turned it over. She looked through the loop. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. These are not my mother's watches, Caleb. What? These three. They're counterfeits. Very good ones. Better than most. But they're not real. She turned to me. My mother had 6 watches from my father and grandfather. I would know them anywhere. I cleaned 3 of them myself before I left home. And these 3, these are not those watches. I didn't understand. Someone replaced them, she said. Someone took the real ones and put these in their place, while my mother still owned them. Who would do that? She looked at me. Someone she trusted, Caleb. Someone she let into her house. Someone who knew she lived alone. Ruth Callahan's house was a small yellow bungalow on Mulberry Avenue. White shutters, chrysanthemums in clay pots on the porch, a wooden plaque hanging by the door that read, "Bless this home." Reverend Pierce parked at the curb. The 3 of us walked up the path. He rang the bell. The door opened almost before he finished ringing. Ruth Callahan was 70 years old. Small, round, white hair in soft curls, a floral dress under a knitted vest, pink slippers, a pair of reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked at Reverend Pierce. She looked at Maggie. She looked at me, and she put both hands over her mouth. She said, "Oh, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, dear Lord." She stepped back from the door. She said, "Come in, all of you, come in. I've been waiting." Ruth's living room was full of porcelain figurines and needlepoint pillows and a small dog that looked older than I was. She made us sit down. She made us tea. She fluttered around the room like a bird, straightening doilies, brushing crumbs off the coffee table, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue from her sleeve. She kept stopping to look at me, then looking away, then looking at me again. Finally, she sat down across from us in a green armchair. She put both hands flat on her knees. She took a long breath. "All right," she said. Eleanor was very specific. She got up, went to a small writing desk in the corner, opened a drawer. She came back with a manila envelope. It was sealed with red wax. A date was written on the outside in careful black ink. The 14th of March 2026. The day Eleanor had died. Ruth set the envelope on the coffee table. She looked at Maggie. "Eleanor gave this to me 4 years ago," she said. "She told me that one of 3 things would happen. Either she would die and no one would ever come, or her great-grandson would walk up to my door himself someday, or someone who loved him would bring him to me." She looked at the 3 of us. Her eyes filled. I always hoped it would be the 3rd one. She slid the envelope across the table. "Maggie," she said, "it's for both of you." But Eleanor said the boy should open it. Maggie's hands were shaking too hard to pick it up. I picked it up. I broke the wax seal. Inside were 3 things. A long handwritten letter on cream-colored stationery, a small black and white photograph, a baby in a hospital cap, 2 days old, eyes closed, and a smaller envelope sealed with one word written on the front, "Margaret." I unfolded the letter. I tried to read. My eyes wouldn't focus. I held it out to Maggie. "You read it," I said. "Please." "I can't." She took it. She put on her reading glasses. Her voice was very quiet when she began. "My dearest grandson, if you are reading this letter, it means that I am gone, and that you have found your way to me anyway, the way I prayed every single night that you would. I never knew your name. I never knew your face. The adoption records were sealed, and by the time I started looking for you, I was already an old woman with very little money and very little time. But I knew the day you were born, the 3rd of November, 2006. I knew the hospital. I knew that the woman who took you home was a young widow with a good heart, and that my Diane had chosen her with great care. I want you to know that you were not given away. You were given. There is a difference. The difference is everything. My daughter Diane made a decision in the last months of her life that I did not understand at the time. She chose to carry you to term knowing it could cost her everything. She chose to place you with a woman she had met only briefly because she believed with all her heart that you deserved a young mother who could love you without the weight of grief the rest of us were already carrying. She was right. I know now that she was right. Wherever you grew up, whatever your name is now, whoever loved you, I want you to know that another woman loved you too, from the day you were born until the day she died. That woman is me. My name is Eleanor Ann Brooks. I am your great-grandmother. I made many mistakes in my life. The largest of them was driving my only daughter out of my house in 1983 because I could not accept the man she had chosen to marry. My pride cost me everything. Your grandmother, my Maggie, was the brightest light I ever held in my hands. I taught her to read when she was 4. I taught her to tell time on her father's pocket watch when she was 6. She used to sit on a stool in his shop and hand him tools while he worked. And one night in our kitchen, I told her that if she married that boy, she would never be welcome in my home again. I did not mean it. I meant it for 1 hour, maybe 2. And then I came to my senses, and I went to the telephone, and I called her at her apartment. She did not answer. Your great-grandfather William sent her money every Christmas, in secret, until the day he died. He kept the Christmas cards she sent back. He read them every year on her birthday. He never told me about them. I found them after he died, 10 Christmas cards from a daughter I'd thrown out of my house. I threw them away. I have regretted that for 30 years. Tell your grandmother. Tell her about the cards. Tell her father never stopped loving her. Tell her I never stopped either. Tell her the only reason I never picked up the telephone was that I was too proud and too ashamed and too afraid that she would hang up on me. Tell her I died loving her more than the world. And tell her this too. The shop on Birch Street, where you are going if you have not gone already. I have driven past that shop. I have driven past it 11 times in the last 15 years. I would park across the street. I would sit in my car. I would watch through the window. I saw her cleaning. I saw her working at her bench. I never went in because I was a coward. So go in for me. Walk through her door. Ring her bell. Sit at her table. Drink her tea. Be the love between us that I was too afraid to be myself. Eleanor Ann Brooks. Maggie set the letter down very slowly. She did not cry. She had passed the place where tears could carry what she was feeling. She just sat there, with the letter on her knees, looking out Ruth's front window at the chrysanthemums on the porch and the leaves of the maple tree across the street. After a while, she picked up the second envelope, the smaller one, with her name on it. She held it for a long time before she opened it. It contained one sheet of paper. She read it silently. She read it 3 times. Then she pressed it against her chest and bent forward, and she made a sound I will never forget as long as I live. It was the sound of a wound she had carried for 43 years finally being allowed to heal. When she could speak again, she handed me the paper. My Maggie, the last thing I ever said to you was the worst thing I have ever said to anyone in my life. I am going to my grave knowing that I never had the courage to call you on the telephone and take it back. Please forgive me. I loved you every single day, even the days I was too proud to tell you, even the days I pretended I had stopped. Take the house. The deed is with my lawyer, James Holloway, on Lincoln Street. I have already changed it to your name. You should have had it 40 years ago. Be good to the boy. He is the best of us. Mama. 3 days later, Maggie sent me back to Unit 114. She had been quiet that morning. She had been turning something over in her head. She said, Caleb, the 3 counterfeit watches. Eleanor must have known. I said, how would she have known? She was sharp until the very end. Reverend Pierce said so. Ruth said so. A woman like my mother, a watchmaker's daughter, would have noticed the weight of those watches in her own hand. She would have noticed the sound of the movements. She looked at me. If she noticed, she would have written it down. My mother wrote everything down. She came from that generation. They didn't have computers. They had paper and ink and drawers full of records. She paused. There's more in that unit than you've found. I'm certain of it. Go back, look in every corner, move every box. Don't leave until you've turned the place inside out. I drove out to Riverside Storage that afternoon. Donald Hardesty was on duty. The man with the gray mustache who had pressed the brass key into my hand 5 days earlier. He remembered me. He gave me a long, slow look. He said, "You came back." I said, "I need to look at the unit one more time." He said, "It's still yours, son. You paid for it. You can keep it as long as you want." He gave me a fresh padlock and a new key. I drove around to the back of the property. I rolled up the orange metal door of Unit 114. The unit was mostly the way I had left it, but I had not looked behind everything. I started moving boxes. I worked for 2 hours. Behind the old metal trunk, pressed against the back wall, was a wooden crate. It was old. The wood was darker than the other boxes. It looked older than I was, older than my mother had been, older than Maggie, maybe even older than Eleanor. There was a small padlock on it. I had no key for the padlock. I drove home. I told Maggie. She went to the small desk in the back room of the shop. She opened a drawer. She took out a tiny brass key on a faded blue ribbon. She said this was in the lockbox, underneath the foam padding for the watches. I didn't know what it was for. I assumed it was a spare for one of the watches. I drove back. The key fit. Inside the crate were 3 things. A leather-bound diary, worn, filled, front to back, with Eleanor's handwriting. A small bundle of letters tied with a string. The letters were addressed to Eleanor. The handwriting on the envelopes belonged to my grandfather, William Brooks, the husband she had loved and lost. And a manila folder. Inside the folder were photographs, dozens of them, all of the same man, a man with a soft, fleshy face, a gold pinky ring, eyes that did not move when his mouth did. Some of the photographs had been taken through a kitchen window, some from behind a bush. Some had been taken with a telephoto lens by an investigator she must have hired. Frank Delaney. Stapled to the inside of the folder was a list. 6 names: Eleanor Brooks, Dorothy Whitfield, Hilda Markham, Esther Lindquist, B. Donnelly, Joyce Stein. 6 elderly women, all within a 5-block radius of Eleanor's bungalow on Sycamore Lane. Beside each name was a list of dates, amounts, items he had taken from each of them. Eleanor had been keeping records. Eleanor had been building a case. Eleanor had been doing what the police should have been doing, because she was an old woman, because she was alone, because the only thing she had left was the ability to write things down and to remember. The diary was the worst part. I read it that night in Diane's old bedroom, with the lamp on the bedside table casting a small yellow circle on the page. Eleanor had started keeping the diary in 2020, the year Frank Delaney moved in next door. In the first entry, she wrote, "A new neighbor moved in this morning. A widower, he says. Wife passed last spring. He brought me a casserole dish. Says he likes to cook. He has kind eyes. 3 months later, Frank drove me to the doctor today. I told him he didn't have to. He said it was no trouble. He waited 2 hours in the waiting room. I am ashamed of how grateful I am for a stranger's kindness." 6 months later, Frank says he can help with the bank statements. The numbers move so fast on the screen these days. He says he will set up automatic payments for the bills. He says I should not worry. He says that is what neighbors are for. A year later, I cannot find the gold pocket watch, the one William wore on our wedding day. I have looked everywhere. I asked Frank if he had moved it when he was helping me clean. He said no. He said maybe I had given it to someone and forgotten. He looked at me when he said it. He looked at me the way you look at someone you think is losing her mind. 2 years later, the entries became darker. 3 of the watches in the lockbox are not the right watches. The weights are wrong. The movements sound different when I hold them to my ear. Someone has switched them. I am almost certain now, but I cannot prove it. And if I cannot prove it, no one will believe me. I am an old woman alone in a house full of clocks. 3 years later, I have started taking photographs of every watch, of every piece of jewelry, of the silver, of the china, I take the photographs to the post office and have them stamped. I have started a folder. If I die, someone will find this folder. And the last entry, dated 2 weeks before her death. I am very tired. The pain in my side is worse. I have not told anyone. I do not want Frank to come to the hospital. I do not want him to be the last face I see. I am leaving everything I have written and gathered to my friend Ruth in a sealed envelope and to a man named Nathaniel Pierce at the Methodist Church on Hawthorne Avenue. He has been kind to me. He does not know what I am preparing, but I trust him. The Lord puts the right people in our path at the right time. If my great-grandson ever reads this, I want him to know that I have been carrying him in my heart for 20 years. I have not held him. I have not seen him, but I have loved him. Please forgive me. Please forgive me. Please forgive me. The next morning, I took the diary and the folder to the police station. I sat down with a detective, a woman named Sergeant Linda Marsh. She had short gray hair and very kind eyes. She listened to my whole story without interrupting once. She made copies of everything. She thanked me 3 times. She said, Mr. Whitlock, your great-grandmother just solved a case we have been trying to crack for 2 years. She said, we have suspected Frank Delaney for a long time. We have not been able to get a single one of the victims to file a formal complaint. They are all elderly. They are all isolated. They are all afraid. She said, your great-grandmother built us a case from beyond the grave. Frank Delaney was arrested 10 days later. The other victims came forward once they realized they were not alone. Dorothy, Hilda, Esther, Bea, Joyce. All 5 of them. They sat in the witness room of the courthouse together for the preliminary hearing. They held each other's hands. Frank Delaney pleaded guilty. The investigation expanded. The newspapers picked it up. Briarwood Tavern was closed and the assets sold. I received the back wages he had stolen from me, plus restitution. The 5 elderly women received settlements as well. He went to prison. I did not go to the sentencing, but Maggie did. She sat in the front row. She wore her mother's pearls. She looked Frank Delaney in the eye when the judge read the sentence. And when she came home that evening, she sat down at the kitchen table, and she said one sentence. She said, we will never speak his name in this house again. We have not. James Holloway had been Eleanor's attorney for 30 years. His office was above a flower shop on Lincoln Street. There was a brass plate on the door that needed polishing. The carpet on the stairs was worn thin in the middle. He was a man in his 70s, with silver hair and a soft voice and a thick file with my name on it. He had been waiting for someone to walk through his door for a long time. He had Eleanor's will. He had the deed to the bungalow on Sycamore Lane already in Maggie's name, as Eleanor had instructed. He had a savings account, $150,000, slowly accumulated over 40 years of careful living and frugal habits. He had paperwork establishing me as Eleanor's legal heir. He looked at me across his desk. He said, your great-grandmother was the most patient woman I ever met. She told me many times that she did not believe she would live to see her great-grandson. But she also told me every time we updated her will that she did not believe God would let her work be wasted. She said, somebody will come, James. Eventually somebody will come. He smiled. She was right. The bungalow on Sycamore Lane was already Maggie's. The money came to me. I sat in my grandmother's kitchen that night with the bank papers in front of me, and I looked at her across the table, and I said, I want to use some of this to fix up Eleanor's house. Maggie said, it's my house now. I said, I know. That's why I want to fix it up for you. She looked at me. Caleb, I have lived above this shop for 23 years. I am not moving. I know. I don't want you to move. I want you to have the bungalow. For when you want a garden, for when you want to sit in your mother's chair on her porch, I want you to have a place that was hers, that you can be in. Whenever you need to. She looked at her teacup for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. She said, all right, Caleb, all right. We spent the spring fixing up Eleanor's bungalow. We painted the inside. We replaced the front porch railing. Maggie planted chrysanthemums in clay pots along the walk. We hung curtains in every window. We polished the wood floors until they shone. We did not change much. We kept her furniture. We kept her dishes. We kept the small wooden cross above the kitchen sink, and on a Sunday afternoon in April, Maggie sat down for the first time in her mother's living room, in her mother's chair, and she closed her eyes, and she said one sentence. She said, "Hello, Mama. I'm home." The sign over the shop on Birch Street was repainted that summer. It now reads, "Brooks and Aldridge Timepieces, 3 Generations." I work behind the counter. Maggie sits in the leather chair by the window most mornings with her cup of tea and her reading glasses, watching the people walk by on the sidewalk. She still does the most delicate repairs. Her hands are steady when the work is small. I do the heavy work. The cleaning, the carrying, the customers who come in off the street confused about whether their watch can be saved. I am not a master watchmaker yet. I will not be for many years. But I know things now I did not know before. I know what a healthy movement sounds like. I know how to spot a counterfeit bezel from 6 feet away. I know how to look at an elderly customer holding a watch her husband gave her in 1973 and to handle that watch like it is the most important object in the world. Because it is. Because every object somebody keeps for 50 years is the most important object in the world. I have learned that Reverend Pierce comes for dinner every Sunday. Maggie makes pot roast. He brings flowers from the church garden. We talk about Eleanor sometimes. We talk about Diane sometimes. We talk about Rebecca, too. I have come to understand something I did not understand at first. I have 3 mothers, and not one of them is more or less than the others. Eleanor, the great-grandmother who looked for me for 20 years. Diane, the birth mother who chose to die so I could live, and chose Rebecca to raise me before she went. Rebecca, the woman who took a stranger's baby and built her whole life around him, who worked herself into an early grave to give me a chance. 3 women, none of whom got to live long enough to see the others meet, but all of whom meet every day. In the upstairs apartment of a watch shop on Birch Street, in the 3 photographs that hang on the wall behind the counter, in the prayer Reverend Pierce says before every Sunday dinner, they meet in me. In April, Maggie and I drove to Ohio. I had not been able to afford a real headstone for Rebecca's grave. The trunk of the Buick held a piece of gray granite I had ordered 3 months in advance. It was etched with gardenias. It read, "Beloved Mother of Caleb, Chosen Mother, Forever Mother." The cemetery workers helped us set it in place. Maggie stood beside me at the grave. She held my hand. She said, "Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for loving him. Thank you for keeping him alive until he could find his way home to us." She put a single gardenia on the headstone. I knelt down. I put my hand on the granite. I said, "Mama, I want you to know I have a grandmother now. She is your son's grandmother, too. She would have loved you. I think you would have loved her." When I stood up, my knees were wet, but my heart was lighter than it had been in many years. I went back to Riverside Storage one more time. I went on the anniversary of the day. I had bought Unit 1, 14. The unit was empty by then. I had cleared it out completely over the course of several months. I had kept the empty photo album. I had filled it. I had filled it with photographs of Maggie, of me, of the shop, of Rebecca's headstone, of Diane's old bedroom, of Eleanor's bungalow with its restored front garden and Maggie's chrysanthemums in the new clay pots on the porch. I had filled the pages, all of them, front to back. I had brought the album with me that day. I had walked into the empty unit 114 inches the late afternoon light. I had set the album on the concrete floor. I had set a single white candle next to it. I had lit the candle. I had spoken out loud. I had said, "Thank you, Eleanor. I am sorry I never got to meet you. I am glad you waited for me. I am sorry it took me so long to come." I had stayed for an hour. I had watched the candle burn down. I had blown it out. I had rolled down the orange metal door for the last time. I had given the key back to Donald Hardesty. He had remembered me. He had said, "You did all right, kid." I had said, "Yes, sir, I did." Some nights, after we close the shop, Maggie and I sit in the back room with our tea. We do not always talk, we just sit. The clocks tick in the front of the shop, hundreds of them, pendulum clocks, mantel clocks, cuckoo clocks, wristwatches in their displays, all ticking, all counting time that is passing and time that is yet to come. Outside, somewhere in the city, the bells of the Methodist Church on Hawthorne Avenue ring the hour. And I think about the night I had $30 in my pocket and half a photograph in my hand. I think about the man who tore that photograph in half. I think about the woman who pressed a granola bar into my palm at 5:47 inches the morning in a Greyhound bus station. I think about Reverend Pierce, about the flyer, about Unit 114, about a brass bell ringing over a door on Birch Street. I think about Eleanor. I think about her sitting in a folding chair outside a storage unit, drinking tea, watching cars go by, waiting, just waiting. I think about how she never gave up. I think about how love is patient, how love is kind, how love keeps watch even on the nights you cannot see it. Especially on those nights. I am 21 years old. I have a grandmother. I have a great-grandmother in heaven. I have two mothers in heaven. I have a pastor for a Sunday dinner uncle. I have a shop with 3 photographs on the wall. I have a sign over my door that reads, 3 generations. I have a small brass key in my pocket. It opens nothing anymore. I carry it anyway, because some keys are not for opening anymore. Some keys are for remembering, and what I remember every time my hand closes around it is this. You can lose everything in a single night. You can sit on the wet ground behind a restaurant and believe that the world has ended, and then somebody can pour you a cup of coffee, and somebody can hand you a flyer, and you can walk into a place no one else wanted to enter. And you can find a key taped to the underside of a lockbox. And you can come home to a family you didn't know was waiting. The Lord is patient. The Lord is kind. And He has been keeping watch all along. The end.